Hey everybody, this is Scott Moore, and you're watching the one and only SMC Journal podcast, the only podcast where it's all about performance engineering and IT today, every aspect of performance engineering. Thank you for joining us. On today's episode, we're talking about monitoring your infrastructure, monitoring your database, monitoring your containers for performance, for how is it doing out there. And now we're not just talking about observability, we're talking about just standard monitoring and what you can do with it. There's a product out on the market called Checkmk, and I'm going to be talking to one of their representatives on today's show. We'll really get into what does a good monitoring solution look like, and this monitoring solution has to play well with others to be valuable to an organization. So I want to find out how Checkmk works and how it works with others to bring valuable information to people who are monitoring their stuff. They have over thousands of plugins that are used with this product depending on what you want to monitor, and it's a very extensive solution. So I want to talk about that today. Before we do, let's talk about the sponsors that make this show possible. This episode is sponsored by Micro Focus and the LoadRunner Solutions family. That includes LoadRunner Professional, Enterprise, Cloud, and Developer. You know, performance matters. Did you know that LoadRunner Solutions have the largest community of practitioners in the world? Join that community at community.microfocus.com, scan the QR code, and check out the LoadRunner family page on performance engineering, as well as their YouTube playlist that we've got links for in the show notes on smcjournal.com as well as YouTube. This podcast is sponsored by Folk Consulting. They offer high-quality consulting services around application performance management and operational monitoring of system performance. Ryan Folk and his staff of highly experienced consultants can handle any of your needs around application delivery management, analytics, application performance testing, monitoring, and digital management. Find out more at folkconsulting.com. This episode is sponsored by Haymaker Coffee Company. Did you know that we have our own blend of coffee? That's right, it's the Scott Moore 503 blend. The Performance Tour Edition is a 6-ounce bag of espresso roast that's made specifically for me. Go to haymakercoffeeco.com and use our code PERF10 to get 10% off your purchase. Every purchase that you make supports the SMC Journal, as well as the other things that I do for the performance community. So go and check them out and get some today. I'm sure you'll love this coffee as much as I do. So let me tell you about that Haymaker coffee. Some of you have won those bags of coffee as prizes in the events of the road show for the performance tour, namely Austin, Nashville, Atlanta, other places. I'm still waiting to hear back from some of you on what you think. I haven't heard anybody say it was bad. Still loving working with those guys at Haymaker. We've got a bag sitting back there. We've got some other bags of Haymaker back here you might have seen. But so let's get back to talking about monitoring. Checkmk. I met Elias in Atlanta about a month ago when he attended a road show, and we got to talking and comparing notes, and it was a great conversation. I said, hey, he has a podcast, I have a podcast, so we're doing each other's podcast. And I wanted to introduce more people to this product, Checkmk, which is a monitoring solution. So let's go to my interview with Elias right now. Hi, I've got Elias Volker on with me today on the SMC Journal podcast. Elias, welcome.
Hey, Scott. We're glad to be here.
Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and talk about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Great. Thanks for having me again. My name is Elias. I'm responsible actually for the North American business of Checkmk. And for those of you who are not familiar with Checkmk, we are a monitoring software company. So we do IT infrastructure monitoring, be it on-prem infrastructure or cloud-based infrastructures or anything in between. And we are originally from Germany. This is our home market, but our, I believe, second most important market by now is North America. And I just recently actually relocated to Atlanta to put boots on the ground, as the Americans like to say, ramp up a team here to better serve our U.S. customers and support them and ideally find a few more of them.
Well, welcome. I hope you've already tried some barbecue and got yourself solidified in the South.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I used to live in the South way back in the day, so I was looking forward to coming back. And Atlanta is quite a nice place. It's not Texas if it comes to barbecue, but it's pretty nice.
Well, you can. There's states you can travel to very close there. You can get some decent barbecue. I can think of a couple. But it's so good to have you on the show. So I was showing the webpage for Checkmk. Um, Infrastructure monitoring and monitoring of applications is extremely important. While you're doing load testing, whether you're monitoring production or whatever it is, tell me how this got started because it sounds like it's gotten to be a pretty huge thing there. I see 2,000 plugins that you have. Tell me about this product.
That is true. All right, so the whole thing started, as many things in monitoring do, with Nagios. And our founder, Matthias, um, he actually developed Checkmk originally as a small extension to fix some of the issues he was having in his consulting work with Nagios. And then from there was no stopping it, and it turned into a fully fledged product. And for many years, it was running as a purely open source project. At some point, Matthias and by then his team decided to develop their own monitoring core, what we call today the Checkmk microcore, which sort of fully emancipated Checkmk from Nagios and became sort of a monitoring software in its own right. And that then turned into the Checkmk Enterprise Edition, which is the product that we're selling. We're still maintaining and doing all the open source work with the Checkmk Raw Edition, which is still based, so one of the grandchildren of Nagios. And yes, as you know, is that the especially the on-premise world, but the IT world is super complex, and there's so many different systems around. And one of the things that we believe makes Checkmk unique is that you can cover a lot of ground using all these plugins for all these different. Just think about how many different types of databases there are, how many different storage vendors, how many different network vendors, and all of these want to be monitored and need to be monitored. And every vendor does their own little thing, and our answer to that is having a lot of plugins for these different vendors so that you get the most out of your monitoring for that.
Interesting. So here's the thing. Would you consider Checkmk to be an observability platform? Why or why not?
So, I mean, we could probably talk for hours about what's the difference between monitoring and observability. We don't call ourselves an observability platform for a reason. We are part of the observability ecosystem, and we integrate with a lot of observability tools. I'm going to name a few names. There's if you talk about getting data into Checkmk, you can integrate with tools like Prometheus or Datadog. If you're talking about getting data out of Checkmk, you can integrate with tools like InfluxDB or Grafana, which are also all in this space. So I think we call ourselves a monitoring tool for a reason, but we're part of the larger observability ecosystem. And there are aspects of observability that we don't do, that we leave to others. You don't do tracing with Checkmk, and we have some capacity for log monitoring, but there's specialized tools like Graylog or Logstash and others that do Splunk, that do a really great job at working with logs, where we say, hey, there's a best of breed approach, and we're really, really good at managing all these diverse pieces of infrastructure and doing monitoring there. Let's leave some of these others to the others.
So that's a great answer. The observability has just been thrown around so much by companies, but if this is true monitoring, the key for me would be how well, and you mentioned this a little bit, how well you work with others, how well you play with other players. And what I mean by that is, let's say there's a company who just does end user monitoring. Maybe they do synthetic monitors, or they do real user monitoring with RUM data, but they're more concerned with what the end user is actually seeing, a rendered page there. But they may not offer infrastructure monitoring. They don't know what the CPUs are doing, and they don't know what the containers are doing or what the database level is doing. So do you work with those kind of vendors actively to combine that information together?
That's actually an excellent question. So there is a solution that we work with. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the robot framework, and you can integrate that directly into Checkmk via an integration called RobotMK. So it can pulls together those two things, and via that you can use tools like Selenium and many others, and sort of run the tests and see the results of the test directly in Checkmk. As for the others, that would probably be some kind of custom integration where you use, REST APIs that talk to each other to bring these things together, or you pump all the data into a third tool, a time series database or whatnot, to then analyze them more deeply.
Okay, so you mentioned Grafana, and I'm sure that you've got your own way of visualizing the data that you are producing and also ingesting maybe from these other tools. It seems to me that the big differentiator is how data is visualized. So Grafana is something that people are using for, and not just for testing or performance. They're using it for a lot of different things. I've seen people monitoring their Teslas and their thermostats and things like that with Grafana. So tell me about the graphs and the charts and the visualizations with Checkmk. Is this something where it's a SaaS product and you go there and you visualize your data there? Is it something you pull down and you create it that way, or how is it visualized?
So first, before I get to that, really quickly on Grafana. So the great thing about Grafana, in terms of as a dashboarding tool, is that you can pull in all this data from these different data sources. And Checkmk has a data source plugin for Grafana. So let's say, to come back to your earlier example, you have Checkmk for your infrastructure monitoring, and you have something else for your end user monitoring. Well, you can pull that together in Grafana and then look at things on that ominous single pane of glass if you choose to. So as for visualizations in Checkmk, obviously, there's sort of, let's call it a sort of an industry standard that has developed a little bit about how people want to consume time series information and the honeycombs and this and that. And you can do all that, and you have your dashlets and you have your, aggregated metrics and all that. And I think we do a pretty, especially with the latest version, a pretty good job. But that's always the data that is going to be present in Checkmk. So we're not Grafana. It's not like you pull in data from somewhere completely else and then visualize it in Checkmk. So that's where something like Grafana would be more suited to. But if you're consuming data that is produced by Checkmk and available in Checkmk, you can build some really nice and fancy eye-candy dashboards that are actually also quite useful.
So what do you think would be the biggest differentiator of Checkmk versus some of the other products that do the same thing?
So that would depend on who else you're comparing us with. But I think one big differentiator versus many tools is that Checkmk has these open source roots. 90+% of our code base are open source. So if you don't like something, if you want to add something, just do it. The code is freely available. Just edit it, just add stuff to it. So that's definitely one aspect that sets us apart from especially some of the commercial tools. Then another thing, you mentioned the 2,000 plugins. These are actually all maintained by us in our development team. So one thing that many sort of pure open source projects have, if people lose interest and stop sort of maintaining these plugins, they don't keep up with the new versions. And at least for those 2,000 plugins, we can guarantee that at least within a reasonable time after a new release, the plugins will still be working with the new versions. And that's important to many of our customers that also, in many cases, have an obligation towards their customers or regulatory authorities to keep an eye on certain things. And then if suddenly say, the contributor who wrote this plugin now lost interest and does something else, then they're stuck. And I think this is something that we are very good at. And last but not least, Checkmk, we kind of pride ourselves in scaling very, very, very well. So we have some of the largest organizations in the world, and especially if it's sort of about horizontal scaling. So let's say you're a supermarket chain with 11,000 stores. There's a server cabinet in every one of these stores, and it needs to be monitored. We're pretty good at that, and I think there's not many that we need to hide behind when it comes to sort of scaling across these huge horizontal infrastructures.
Okay, so one technical question for you, hopefully not throwing you a curveball here, but so there is the way that you can gather all of this monitoring. There's several ways that you can approach it. Most companies use an agent where you install an agent on a machine and it gathers all the data and reports it back up centrally. And sometimes there are ways that you can passively grab without having to install an agent. Is Checkmk one or the other, or is it a combination of the two?
It's a combination of the two and a little bit more. We do like our agents. We have agents for many operating systems and probably for a few you don't know. Well, you know them, but there's things like very exotic AIX, Solaris, FreeBSD, these kind of things. And you can extend these agents with plugins for specific things. So you extend your Windows agent with an MS SQL plugin to get additional data on the MS SQL database that might be running on that server. So we do like our agents, and we tell our customers whenever you have the chance to deploy an agent, please do so. It's the most efficient way of getting your monitoring data. Obviously, if you're talking about network monitoring, there's SNMP, still around, still there, not going anywhere. So that we have that as a data source. And then with everything that's a bit more modern, you have your APIs. That you can use to retrieve data from. So that's an important data source that Checkmk can interact with. And then there's all these kind of sort of secondary data sources like, you do HTTP, HTTPS, ping, whatnot, that are less relevant, but in some use cases, it might just be enough to ping the access point and say, hey, are you still there? And that's fine as well. No need to sort of do any fancy kind of agent deployment on a Wi-Fi access point.
I think most performance engineers would prefer a combination. When you need to get deep information, I don't know of a better way to do it than an agent. There are certain things you cannot get from a machine unless you install an agent on it. But there are some things where you can lower the overhead, pulling some things passively and get good information that you can compare with other data to keep the overhead lower. So I really like that approach. So this is great. Is there anything that you would like to share about maybe the plans or the roadmap of Checkmk, like where you might be going? Because obviously if you're setting up an office here in the US, you're growing, you've got future plans. Where do you take the product from here?
So it's, I think, no secret that the way that software is being consumed and purchased is different. And we are a solution that comes from the on-premise world. You download it, you install it in your own infrastructure, and then you run it. Well, many companies, for various reasons, don't want to run their own software anymore because of constraints in headcount and people that can actually do it, or other reasons. And we are working on an answer for that, where companies say, hey, I don't want to run this in my own data set. I want to run it in my cloud environment. Can you make it easier to do that? Or I want somebody else to run it for me. Can you do that? So that's something where there's a lot coming out sort of in the next few months and years that will answer some of those questions. There are customers on the other side that are very glad that we're still around and they can download us and run it, shielded off from the internet in some bunker 50,000 feet under the ground. So there is always going to be those players that appreciate that they have full control of what happens with their tools and where they send their data and so on. And we actually one a branch of the federal government of the US. I'm not going to say which one because we're not allowed to. That appreciated exactly that about the software, that they can run it the way they want it.
That's awesome. Those people that live in the bunker underground sounds like some friends of mine. Probably I know them. No, but this is great. I'm glad that you're growing here. I'm just wondering, one last question here about people who are doing load tests. Many times they are not applying monitoring at the same time that they're doing load tests, but this would be a great solution for them if they were only getting end user times under load, to be able to view what's happening on the infrastructure, what's happening here in these containers while I've reached X number of users. Do you work with load testing tools at all to get that information, Mary? Is that something you would bring together in Grafana, for example, or is there something else?
That would be sort of the natural place to go, either directly into Grafana or some kind of time series database where you can look at these things. I mean, there's sort of the eyeball test that you can always do, and there's a nifty little feature in Checkmk where if you set a pin in a timeline, this pin will be set across all performance graphs for that particular point in time. So you can actually go through things and say, okay, this was running on this piece of infrastructure. Let's see what happened at that point in time. And you see it across your entire infrastructure. But that's sort of an eyeball test. So if you want to pull this together, I think your best idea would be to either go to a time series database or go the Grafana route.
Awesome. Sounds interesting. I will have some links here on the show. I have it on the show notes on smcjournal.com. I'll also put it on the YouTube video. If you're watching the YouTube video and you open up that bottom section, you'll see some links to checkmk.com and some documentation as well. Elias, thank you for being on the show. Anything else you want to share before we end the show?
Well, sure. I mean, I'm here to build up a team, which involves hiring people. So we're initially building out two teams. One is tech support for our customers. The other one is sales. So if you fall into either of those categories and are interested in working for a really nice German company based out of Atlanta, feel free to contact me. As I said, we're ramping up. We're hiring. So, if you're interested, let me know.
Are you going to have free currywurst Fridays? Where you've got currywurst and the French fries with the mayonnaise.
There's going to be free stuff, and whether it's going to be currywurst, I'm not sure. But there is definitely free food and drinks involved.
Start adding that currywurst in there. I may show up. I'm telling you, it's pretty good stuff.
Right. Okay. But currywurst is very much Berlin. We're from Munich, so it would be the white sausage, the Weisswurst.
This is the equivalent of barbecue in America. Okay, it's the currywurst wars of Germany, and every town has their thing, and they're like, "Oh no, the best is." I know the whole thing, so we'll have to have this discussion over some barbecue at some point.
All right, let's do that.
But thanks again for being on the show. Welcome back anytime, Elias.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Elias, for being on the program today. What do you think about Checkmk? I'd like to find out, and I'm sure Elias would too. Give me some feedback. You can reach me at scottmoore.consulting. There is my Twitter handle, Load Tester, as well as a link to my LinkedIn profile. You can also email me your feedback, help@scottmoore.consulting. Do you like programs like this? You like to hear about performance engineering and IT today? Well, subscribe to our YouTube channel and you can hear a lot more. I've been putting out 2 episodes a week all of this year. In fact, by the end of this year, I'll have released over 100 episodes of this show talking about every aspect of performance testing, engineering, and tuning that we can possibly do. So it'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel to let me know if you'd like to hear more. So with that, I'll say thank you again for watching and for this episode of SMC Journal. This is Scott Moore saying bye-bye.